Okay. In this video, we'll focus on collaborating with Git and how that can be done effectively. And the website we'll use for this is called GitHub. So GitHub is one of the multiple providers that allow you to host Git repositories in the internet. And the reason we're using GitHub here is just because they became kind of the de facto standard, um, especially for like if you want to have something out there in the open, if you want to like publish something, make people like aware of it, do something open source. Kind of GitHub is the way to go. But there's many alternatives out there. Also because there's always like a bit of like GitHub is owned by Microsoft, so a bit some controversies surrounding it. Um, Nothing like crazy, but like yeah, a bit. Um, and some of these alternatives are, for example, GitLab, which is a big open provider. They have like a hosted online version, and you can also host it yourself, which is like their big feature. So, for example, the LMU has like their own GitLab instance where I'm not sure this is. I don't. I think this might also be open to students, where you can have your own code up there. There's like many other like Codeberg is another German provider, and many more. Right? There's just like lots of options out there. Um, but GitHub, just like for many things, if you want to like make it public, GitHub is just a good thing because it has a bit more visibility. So yeah, that's why we'll like also use it in this course because it's just so well known. And I think it's good to know that because of that. So maybe you recognize this website where I'm at right now. So this is the GitHub page for the repository for the London Marathon dataset that we ask you to use in exercise 2, in the graded exercise 2. And you can scroll around here. So you see it has this like folder structure that it shows you, like all the files in the repository. You can see this is like always how repositories are identified. So you have like username and repository name. So you see this big green button. So this is used to get access to the code. And how are we best going to do this? This might actually be a good start. No, let's create our own repository, right? I think that's a nicer way. So I can just click new repository. Yes, let's do that. And you see I'm logged in under my own account here, Ansem. And I want to create a new repository. I don't want to use a template. How should we call this? Let's call it git-example. Ah, perfect. It's still available. We don't need I can make this public. I'll delete it anyways after because that's just in the way. Yes, and it gives you some options here. I think usually it doesn't make sense to like click these because it can make your life a bit more difficult. Like once, this is one of the few things to keep in mind with Git. If you want to somehow combine or merge changes with Git, they need to come from the same base. And so that's why these can be a bit of like a caveat. If you already create a Git repository with some files in there, it can really backfire because then you cannot like combine your changes anymore. So I'll show you two ways of linking your local project with the remote version, so the online version. And yeah, one of them just doesn't work if you use this, if you create these files already. So I would usually suggest just like don't do it. Just create it like empty. So I create my repository. You can see here, Jan Zim, this is my username, git example. Gives me all sorts of like stuff here to kind of motivate me to use their features. I don't care. What I do care about is this. So this is the URL to the Git repository. So this is the how I use it with Git. And there's two options here, HTTPS and SSH. And we ask you to, so this has been one of the prerequisites that I told you about earlier, to set up the SSH authentication because it's the more secure and like better one. The other one is really like kind of a pain to set up and like use because it like expires and everything. So SSH is just like much nicer. And once you have this running, you can just always use the SSH version. So here you have this link for a newly created repository. If a repository already exists, like this one, which is the materials for an Git introduction course, like a full day course that I also teach, you have this big green button, and there you also get these same URLs that I just talked about. Then you also just want to use the SSH one and then copy this. But let's stick with our newly created example. So I'm going to copy this. And now I have two ways. So, and they both have kind of like their pros and cons. So the first one, similar to create new project before, is that I just create a new project in RStudio from this Git repository that I just asked for. So I can click new project. Then version control down here. So we didn't use this one before. Git. And this is already the name for it, clone. So, I mean, all these Git commands have like specific names to them. And like clone is a good way. Like if you want to just copy over an existing repository, just use git clone. And then this into repository URL, you just copy this. Project directory name, yeah, we just want to name this git example. And then ask me where to clone it. Where do you want to clone this? I mean, I already have this git example here, so maybe this we can give it a git example cloned. We're gonna open this in a new session. And now it already initialized the Git repository because we cloned it. Oh, it actually created this itself. Weird. If we look into Git, now like it just, because this was empty, of course, it downloaded nothing. If we would have, oops, oh, down here. If you already had files here, it would have like downloaded all the files. So maybe I'll actually also, no, I don't think I need to show this. But for example, if I would have used this and this URL instead, it would have downloaded all these files, all the history, everything in there. So that's what happens if you clone something, right? But if you clone an empty one, you can just start from scratch and like start your project. But of course, maybe you already have an existing project like we do, right? We don't want to start from scratch. I already did all this work. I already have my plots here. So what do I do then? And this is a bit more complicated because sadly, yeah, RStudio doesn't have like a UI version for this. So what do? We click on terminal. We copy this link again, this one. And then if we want to link this to our existing repository, let me clean this one again, sorry. We just write git remote because we make one link to this remote repository, add, because we want to create a new remote link, origin, because that's how we want to name this link. We can just name this whatever we want to, but origins is kind of the standard name, and then we just paste it in there, our link, enter, and now it's there. And I can go back to the console, and I can refresh here, and it has not detected this, so I need to reload this again. So yeah, that's a bit annoying with RStudio. It's not the best at like detecting these changes. Now it should actually recognize this. Why does it not? That's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. Oh, it doesn't have this set up yet. Okay. So this is another like small technicality. I really think it's worth it to show you these things, even though it's like, these things are like actually now really, where Git is like a bit more complicated to use, but I still want to like briefly touch upon it. So I created this link. So what I will have to do is write this by hand. So that's why I say that like it's good to know that this does exist. I'll show you, if you just clone a repository, all of this is much easier. So I would just suggest to always just go with the cloning, because then this is set up for you. But basically we edit this remote. We still have to tell it a bit more specifically that we also want to kind of use this remote. Like right now, we have this main branch that we're working on, and I won't go into detail about branches, but it's kind of like separate versions that you can work on in a repository. And we need to tell it that this main branch should go to the remote. The way we do this is, and this is already the same as you do it in general, like you always use git pull and push for collaborating. So now I will just git push my changes to get it out there, and it's gonna give me an error because it doesn't know that this link exists yet that I was just talking about. And this is why RStudio is confused here. But then I just can copy paste this part in here, and this tells it that this is the upstream. So it just creates this link now, and already pushes out changes. But once we did this once, now this link exists, and I can actually just, I don't need to write exit. I can just close it. And so now with the push, my changes are already there. So if you now look, okay, my changes are here. And now just to show my point, what can we add here? Okay, let me actually just change the theme. Boost is the easiest. Oh. Of course, we need to execute everything. And we see, okay, it's the different theme. So I go to commit, see my changes here, and switch to theme black white. I commit this, and I just committed this with command enter, sorry. And now we get this tiny pop-up here. You see your branch is ahead of origin main by 1 commit. So after this link was created, it's all like much easier to use. Sorry for the confusion around this. But now I can push my changes. So with push, I mean, it's kind of the arrow going, and maybe it's a bit complicated still. Like push means my changes getting pushed to the remote, to GitHub. And with pull is me pulling in the changes from GitHub. That's the only like really important terminology around this. So like we want to push our changes. And if we look here, you see, this is from like half an hour ago, the changes I made earlier. I refresh this now. And just now, this is the latest changes. And you see, this was the commit message that I used. We can also see here the history as well. We can go back and forth. All these things that we can do in RStudio, we can also do on GitHub, which is really nice. And with this, I would get the latest changes. Of course, there's none already up to date, just so you know. And you will always, when you're collaborating, you will always first have to pull their changes before you can push yours. It's just something good to know. Like that's always the workflow. So usually it's good to just always first pull and then push. Okay, but that's, and now just because I created this twice, right? This is the clone repository, and all this like set upstream and what I just did before, which was like really confusing. This has already been done here. Because if you git clone a repository, it kind of does all this for you, which is really nice. And these files, just like, yeah, RStudio just created for me. I don't want these. But let me actually refresh. Oh, okay, this is so annoying. Okay, this is really bad timing that I used. Because we cloned this repository when there was no branch yet, it actually is not set up. So let's try and pull this way as we just let me just reclone it. I don't care. It's the easiest. Usually like if you have some issues, like just clone again from the internet. It's the easiest. So I copied this again. Sorry, but there's some complications around Git sometimes. Like in general, still it's really very much worth it. And I guess it's good to show these around as well. So we go back to version control, Git. I put in the name here again, and example cloned number 2, because why not? Open in a new session. Yes, we don't want to overwrite this. And so now the sad thing is, okay, because it's already now we're cloning it, it's going to get all the latest changes. But we'll work around this. And you can see that the script is here. But let's simulate that this is now Jacob, right? And so you have the 2 windows here. So git example is me, git example clone number 2. Let's say this is Jacob. And Jacob is working on it. He executes everything. And he thinks like, I don't know, this is not the coolest theme or something. Let's find another one. Let's like, yeah, this is like really like the gray theme. That's a good one. That's lovely. I'd rather use this theme. So then he goes to Git, he makes the change. Oops, not history, my bad. Commit. Let's make it a bit spicy, use a much better theme. So he commits it. He first pulls for changes just to be safe. There's none because we know. Then he pushes. The changes get uploaded. Close this. Okay, perfect. Then you will now be able to see it on GitHub, but like, let's not take forever. That's now on my side. I pull, and we see it pulled one, and now it's here. The changes are here from him. And this would work across machines. Like, this is just because I'm only on one computer that I'm doing it this way. And if I look at the history, we also see the whole history. Of course, because we're on my machine, this is still under all my name, right? But like, you can see the gist of it. And like with multiple people, you would see the different names and everything. And yes, I hope this got the point across. So in general, it's a bit complicated to have an existing repository and link it to GitHub. As you saw, it's like all these like weird niche problems. It's not like undoable. It's really like, it's just these two commands really, and then it works out of the box. Once the setup is done, it's always like really easy to use. But the setup can be complicated. And you can see if something is not initialized correctly, you will see that these two buttons are like gray. So in general, I would always suggest if you want to collaborate, just clone the repository and it's going to make the setup much better for you. Yes, so I think that's the gist for this video. So you have an idea of what GitHub is and how to collaborate with Git. And I shall see you in the next and last video for this session.